Well, I'd like to welcome our guest presenter this evening, Reverend Dave uh, Canton. I'm sorry,
It's all right. No
Gatton,
worries.
Reverend Dave Gatton, who I've known all my life, be presenting tonight. But before he does so, I'm going to ask him to give a little background. He is the minister of the Universalist National Memorial Church in Washington, D.C., which many people may not know that we do have a National Memorial Church. So, Dave, if you could give a little background on the church and then yourself, and then we'll turn to a chalice lighting and then a reading by Helen, and then on to your presentation. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and the church?
Sure. Well, first, let me say uh, how wonderful it is to be here. Thank you for the invitation to say a few words. And let me just say that count me in for future calls and Zooms as a participant, listener. I think what you're doing is really important and needed in terms of our Universalist faith. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I'll spread it to our congregation as well. And I do want to send greetings from our congregation. We're a national church. It's in our name. It was the cornerstone was laid, I think, around 1929. It was built through national contributions from Universalists across the country. And it is located on 16th Street. Many of you know 16th Street is the street of churches in DC. It's about 10 blocks north of the White House. So we have a wonderful location. And we invite any of you or your friends who visit DC to come and visit the church. It's a cathedral type church, beautiful stained glass windows, and we are very proud of it. So please come. We are a non-creedal church, but we are anchored in the Christian faith. We believe doctrines, while informative for some, are not absolute, and that each generation and century must interpret the Christian faith for its own time. Our central foundation, you will not be surprised, is our hope and prayer for the final harmony of all souls with God, and for the need for repentance and forgiveness of sin within a loving community in the spirit of Jesus. Having said that, we are a place for congregants to come to explore and work out their own understanding of divinity and their living spirituality. And I say, most importantly, we believe that all religions have something to teach the human race. So we try periodically to have within our open pulpit imams and other religions in the DC area, which is very diverse, to come and grace our pulpit. As for me, I've been the minister there for 7 or 8 years. Uh, Interestingly, I've been a member of the congregation for 35 years or thereabouts. Uh, I went to divinity school. Some of you may remember this when the Rockefeller Foundation had fellowships that tried to encourage people to go into the ministry. Apparently, after World War II, unbeknownst to me, there was a shortage of Protestant clergy. So, one of the ways you won a fellowship was to legitimately convince them that if you won the fellowship, you would go to divinity school, but if you didn't, you wouldn't. So I guess I straddled that fence went to divinity school, and it was really three marvelous years. And then I made the decision to come to DC to start a career in urban affairs. So I really came to the Universalist Church because a person in my graduating divinity school class, Bill Fox, happened to be the minister there, and I wanted to go hear him preach. And some of you may have heard of Bill. He did 2 stints as minister at the Universalist Memorial Church, and then went off to be the president of St. Lawrence University help me out, Canton, New York. Am I right on that? Yes.
That's correct.
So that's how I got there. I Then about 7 or 8 years ago, they asked me if I would be interested in being the senior pastor with, of course, supporting clergy. And I agreed to do that. So while I am definitely older, I have not been a minister for my entire career. I still currently am an assistant executive director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which is the main lobbying and research arm for large cities across the country. If you want to ask me any questions about that later, I'd be more than willing to try to answer them. It does give me a certain perspective, I think, that is valuable because I think I can relate to many of our congregants who are out there in non-religious jobs, non-church jobs, and sometimes that perspective is helpful. So I think I'll stop there. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave. I'm going to light the chalice now. Yes, it is visible. So it will be visible during our service on the table behind me. So I'm going to ask now if Helen, my lovely wife, would do, I think it's 2 readings, right? Helen, 2
Yes,
readings.
these
Dave.
both tie into Dave's homily this evening. The first is some Bible scripture, as Donald Trump would say, 2 Corinthians, but the rest of us will say 2 Corinthians, chapter 3, verse 17 through chapter 4, verse 2. This is from the New International Version. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, who our unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. The second is a reading from William Barrett's Irrational Man, a study of existential philosophy, 1958, about Kierkegaard. For the thinker, as for the artist, what counts in life is not the number of rare and exciting adventures he encounters, but the inner depth of that life, by which something great may be made out of even the paltriest and most banal of occurrences.
Thank you, Helen. Dave, we will hand the floor off to you, and you may begin. And of course, as you conclude, I would ask you to invite people into conversation. But before you do that, hand it back to Richard, who has to do some mechanical announcements about recordings and continuing. So
Okay.
you now have the floor, Dave.
Okay, very good. Well, one of the issues that I've been struggling with and trying to address within our congregation, and I think congregations all across the country, is how to, in these times, maintain our spirituality when it seems as though the ground is shifting underneath us. If you are like me, you're having difficulty figuring that out and holding on to our spirituality in a time of political, social, and I would say even religious upheaval. Whether we agree or not, we do live our lives daily depending upon norms for civic value, stability, and predictability. That's how we live in a community and a nation. Many of those norms are embedded in our democratic institutions and, yes, our civic faith in our country, that we will elect leaders who, once elected, will be for all the people. And I think we are jolted, maybe out of a false sense of lingering manifest destiny, or some may even say a false sense of divine providence, when we see our democratic values severely threatened. So why is this? Haven't we read, even in biblical history, how the Israelites, after being led out of Egypt and freed from slavery, turned their backs on the very source of their freedom? And do we not read also in the Hebrew scriptures this idea of God having given one covenant, but then coming back and requiring a new one because of Israel's apostasy? And we're all familiar with that phrase where even the children's teeth are on edge. An image that I think these days, and I'll get to that later, is sort of seared in our minds. The new covenant, the scripture says, is written on the hearts of the people who have become wayward. And then in addition to that, the whole prophetic tradition is calling to task the apostasy of a people after they have been shown favor by the divine. And then let me carry that forward more than 2 millennia, wherein the 20th century, after 2 world wars started by so-called Christian nations, the church and philosophy just couldn't go back to the way things were. The old answers, read the old spirit, didn't or couldn't work anymore. And so we had the rise of existentialism, where experience governed reality and its depth, because concepts and intellectualism just couldn't provide us meaningful answers. And so you had, interestingly, the title of a book written in 1958 titled Irrational Man. In our own day, we see the living out of the truth of this maxim that the granting of freedom to a people or individual in one age doesn't inoculate them from perpetrating the very evil on others that was once visited upon them. Israel, our beloved Israel, visiting genocide on an innocent people, including children in Gaza. How could that be? History is full of such turnarounds. So for starters, I think when we want to talk about the spirit of our current age and what our country is currently going for, and the threat of democracy, and the threat of, for those of us who want to remain grounded in the Judeo-Christian faith, the realities of Gaza, I think we have to remember that the history of the universe, of the human race, is full of such humanistic unfaithfulness, unfaithfulness to divine values, and that unfaithfulness is unfortunately always possible. And there are many other sources of alienation or fear that develop alongside of our challenges. Science is bringing us possibly a new human subspecies through artificial intelligence. When the people in Silicon Valley maybe didn't have enough sleep the night before and they're interviewed, once in a while they'll let that slip, that what they're really doing is developing a new subspecies of humanity. So the universe as well is becoming so much larger, unimaginably so, through our knowledge of science. Just last week, I heard reported that they discovered a massive black hole, the glow of which was equal to the light of 100 trillion suns. And quantum computers will be able to perform in minutes calculations that our most powerful computers today will take 10,000 years to perform. So, this is more than a perfect storm. These are huge issues, and huge in large part in the latter because throughout history, our concept of God usually follows or is greatly influenced by our understanding of cosmology. So deism arose out of Newtonian laws that said the universe works under these immutable laws, and what God becomes is just a clockmaker that winds up the clock and lets it all run and goes off and does something else, right? So how will the human race, God's creation, keep up with all of this, find meaning in it all? How do we in our spirituality find grounding in it all? Or, like the existentialists, will we be unable to do so and just sort of fall back on this sense of nothingness as we had to do after World War I? And so we should not be shocked that as a member of the universal human race, we would experience the same in our own lifetimes. Or we shouldn't be shocked that we have to confront these incredible transformative changes. And I guess that's where I want to jump off into what might be our answers to all of this. First, let me say we must have faith. And I would say, of course, the young people today say, faith in what? It's difficult for me to conceive of God, let alone a trinity or a spirit, or, by the way, what is a spirit, right? I would say we must have faith in the everlasting values of faith that we experience in our own lives, whatever our concepts are of religion, God, and other religious attributes. And so what are those everlasting values? Faith, hope, love, and that which flows from them. Universal rights, common decency, dignity to all and for all, the inherent value of every person by virtue of their creation. I say faith because it is impossible for us to see the future, let alone our own time, and know how all of these events will play out. But I do think that in this world with all this change, people understand and experience everlasting values. And what do I mean by everlasting values? Values that the person once experienced does not want to go away or die. The love of family, the love of spouse, the love of friends, the hope that shapes our future. All of these things, I won't go through the whole list, are things that when we live, we do not believe go away when we go away. And so we live in many different worlds. We live in the world of science, the world of work, the world of civics, all these worlds that we live in. I would contend to you that we still live within a world of values that we do not want to die. And many of you are ministers, you've seen this. You've seen people who aren't particularly religious, but at the death of a loved one, what do? They often say, well, they're in a better place now, or they're in heaven, or but they haven't just died and not returned to someplace. Well, where did this come from? Did it come from some intellectual understanding of Sunday school that they probably didn't go to? Right? Where does this come from? And I would contend that it comes from a primitive, primal source within us that cannot be denied. And so, I think many of us and the human race gets to this idea of eternal values from deep within. At the same time, there is no vaccine, there is no spiritual vaccine that inoculates us from the opposite, from cruelty and apostasy. But faith that a new covenant can always come our way through a spirit embedded deep in each person can write new things on our hearts. And what do I mean by new things on our hearts? Every age has its own take on the truth, or said in another way, every age has its own truth. And you can't get there before the age allows it, right? You can't see that truth before you get there. Kierkegaard's existentialism would have made no sense in biblical times, right? That age had to come. And that's where that strange phrase, we choose what we have to become, comes from. So we have to write our own truths upon our hearts, but those truths have to be inspired by something deep within us that takes us beyond. So let's explore the spirituality and how it might manifest itself in our times. And I really want to get to a discussion on this because no one has a corner on this information, on this view, right? So let's start with the basics. Spirit is relational. Wherever two or three are gathered, there I am also. Spirit arises in the soul not by itself, like a unitary reflection that stumbles into narcissism and sees or reflects only itself. Spirit must exist in relation to another. Spirit arises, therefore, in community, in relationships, where each to the other puts the other first. Jesus did not come into the world to save himself, but others. Jesus is always looking to others, does not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but what? Empties himself in that Christological hymn. I would say surrenders himself to the higher calling of his time. And that was to be a Messiah. So spirit is one sacrificing a portion of one's own life for another. Spirit is about caring for another. Spirit is about loving another. The experience of coming into relationship with another yields a spirit within oneself that gives one the power to address the challenges of the day and to understand the times. The New York Times recently wrote, I chuckled at this, about this breakthrough research project that showed happiness was best achieved or found when one wasn't focused or preoccupied upon oneself, but when one reached out to another to help another. And I thought, wow, where have you been? Right? I mean, really? I mean, but I was glad they were writing about it, right? Because how many times, particularly the ministers on the call, have we looked for a way for a person who's having a spiritual crisis or under distress? They're trying to figure it out. And our answer has been, or our thought has been, is there anyone in the congregation that we can steer them for that needs their help and their relationship? And I would say that that works far more often than trying to steer them through the morass and depths of their own soul that they just really can't get out of. They have to find a way to go beyond themselves. They have to find a relationship that proves that their soul is capable of some level of transcendence, right? So spirit is relational. Spirit is not a mystical Halloween spirit moving around the neighborhood. It always comes from relation. And my earlier comment about the concepts of God following cosmology, I think this idea of spirit is right for our time, because what times are we in? Space and time are now relative. Space and time is only understood in relationship, right? Spirit and our concept of it in relation fits the cosmology of the theory of relativity. Now, there's a whole lot to be said and books to be written about that. Books probably that I haven't read already have been written on that. There's a thing called process theology, all of that. But the idea is that spirit comes through relation. So when we are in these difficult times, I would propose to you that in order to nurture our spirits, it is important to go beyond ourselves and fortify and strengthen and nurture our relationships, which in turn allow us to be nurtured too. And that is how, in difficult times, We keep our spirits strong. We keep them upbeat. We don't let the history of the human race that's full of apostasy get us down as though what we're experiencing now has never been experienced before in the human race. No, it's a characteristic of the human race. It's here. It'll be here in this age. It'll be here in previous ages. It will be here in the future. So the young person in our congregation asks, well, okay, but I'm not feeling it, right? I mean, I'm not, so isn't isn't a spirit supposed to help me, lift me up? And this is where I think spirit also connects with our cosmology. Um, Immanuel Kant said the sense of awe comes from something very small being laid alongside something very, very big. That's what awe is. And what if we discovered what's the big idea that is in our lifetime about cosmology? It's that the earth is extremely tiny and the universe is unimaginably big. And that, if one contemplates it, brings a sense of awe. When I marry a couple, officiate marrying a couple, I always try to say it took 14 billion years for things happening just the right way for the two of you to be standing here, pledging your lives to one another. And that gets back to that quote from William Barrett in Irrational Man. It's not the big adventures. What people can go through life and never have a big adventure. That's how a lot of the human race lived. They didn't have airplanes, or whatever. But it's finding the magnitude and the mystery and the sense of infinity and eternity in just things that exist. So the sense of awe can lead to a sense of magnanimity, can lead to a sense of glory, can lead to a sense of light, can lead to a sense of ethics. By the way, is there morality in the universe? Or is it only on this little earth? It's an interesting question, right? So one of the things I suggest we do in these hard times is, number one, put them in perspective. And number two, understand, don't forget what the essence of your spirituality is. It's putting others first, yourself last. It's asking for forgiveness so that you can leave your shortcomings behind and not be burdened by them. It's all of these things, and it comes to a sense of reflection, of some sense of glory. Too many additional sermons for that. I'll leave you one thing. I get in an urban church, we are an urban church, get a lot of walk-ins. We are a congregation with very intelligent people, authors, and a church of the homeless. And we meld those into a congregation that has unity. And I will tell you, the only way to do that is to tell the intellectual that you're last in line. You got to put everybody else first. And to tell the homeless, you know what? You're going to be put first. That's the only way to melt that community into one. So I get a lot of walk-ins. Don't know if they're religious or not. And I want to tell you and end with just this one story. Gentleman came to me, he was clearly exercised. He was on the street, not homeless, but on the street, and he had been wronged. And he says, I am ready to go seek revenge. I am ready to do it. And by revenge, he meant something very, very bad. Okay. And I said, you've heard of George Washington, right? Father of the country, first president. But he was the general of the Continental Army during the War for Independence. And what Washington knew, and what scholars say was his genius, is that if the Continental Army were ever captured, it was all over. It was all over if the Continental Army was ever captured. So what General Washington's genius was, he was the master of retreat. That was Washington's genius. He knew when to step back. He knew when to go to the back of the line to preserve the army and therefore to preserve the nation. I said, you've got to do the same thing. You got to learn to know when to retreat or you're going to be dead, right? You're going to be dead. And he took that story and he's alive today. He's a member of the congregation and he attributes to the congregation the saving of his life. That is the spirituality of universalism, where every soul deserves to go to the front of the line. And with that, I'll stop. And Richard, I'd be glad to turn it back to you.
All I wanted to say was that we're going to have a discussion now, I hope, and that you should know that this is being recorded and this will wind up on the Universalist Convocation YouTube channel, and which you can get access to by just going to our website, universalistcongregation.org. And but you may not want to have your comments on YouTube. And if so, when you begin to comment, if you just say something to me, I can pause the recording and what you say will not be recorded. And then when you're finished, I'll start it up again. I just wanted people to know they have that option.
If you'd like to make a comment and be recognized, if you please use your raise the hand function at the bottom. And Richard will be calling upon you as hands are raised.
What happens when you use that function is your window goes to the front of the line. And that way it's easy to call on people in order. And I can see now that Jay has his hand up. And so go ahead, Jay.
Dave, thank you so much. Relatively short notice to ask you to come here. Actually, to come among a bunch of strangers and just speak with us. But I think it has something to do with the fidelity we have among ourselves as Unitarian Universalists, especially those who lean more into the Universalist side, that there's always a welcome door. So I want to thank you very much for your comments and also for your service in Washington at the church. We've had a speaker a couple of years ago, Schuyler Vogel from the Fourth Universalist Church from New York City. Again, very urban church, very much both the wealthy, wise, and homeless all gathered together at one place. So thank you for doing the work that you do.
Thank you, Jay. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you. I would be interested in hearing people's comments, even if they're not questions.
I have one. This is Richard speaking.
Yeah.
I'd like to share something that I think fits in with your sermon and which impressed me a lot. I was reading about Robert Ingersoll, the famous agnostic. This was a man who in the last 25 years of the 19th century went around giving speeches, making fun of conventional religion and so on. But he said at one point, and this is so striking to me, he said, the time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. And the way to be happy is to help other people to be happy.
Mm,
And I thought, wow. Wow.
yeah. That's well said. That's well said.
Justin, please unmute yourself. Justin, you have to unmute yourself. There we go.
I want to thank you for that very universalist sermon. And as someone who went to a Quaker seminary, your talk of the Spirit reminded me of the Society of Friends.
Mm,
And I agree. You have to get out of yourself, and that spirit comes with in relationship. And I think that's very important. If it's all about the individual, about me, you're not going to get anywhere. Well, that's not entirely true. You can get elected president, but you might not get anywhere spiritually. But I wanted to thank you.
well, thank you, Justin. I should have said at the outset that, we are beginning to attract a younger generation to the congregation, which is very encouraging. And I think a lot of it is, well, it's many factors, but I think young people are in this day and age, post-COVID and even pre-COVID, are simply looking for something deeper, and they can't quite buy into just, well, here are the doctrines, this is what you believe, and that's it, right? And I think by our position or premise that doctrine is secondary, but the experience of faith, hope, and love are primary. There is a role for doctrine. Doctrine can be helpful. It's just not absolute. And also the fact that other religions have to offer. The first time we had an imam come, we had a little circle. He sang the prayers. He was in the pulpit. And we had a circle at the coffee hour where we could ask questions and so on. And I ended that by saying, what are you taking away from today? And he said, I've been to more than I can count interfaith programs, forums, whatever. This is the first time I've ever been invited to participate in the worship service. And I quite honestly was stunned by that. And then I got to thinking about it. Well, geez, probably right. And back to that comment that the earth is growing so small, if we are to survive on the earth, we must develop a sense of our common humanity, and by extension, come to understand that all religions have something to contribute and something to say, even though in our own congregation, we value the idea of being anchored in a tradition so that we're just not out there in the ether, right? But we put it in that context. I'll be quiet.
What you just said is represented by that off-center cross symbol that was so common among Universalists 50 years ago. That they explained it by saying the circle represents the universe. The empty space at the center is the mystery at the heart of the universe that we call God. And the cross, of course, represents Christianity, one path toward God, but it's off-center to leave room for other points of view. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Jay?
So, Dave, when you mentioned awe, there's something small compared to something large.
Yes.
And I agree with this. There's no way as human spirit can understand the vastness of space. Even the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy would say it's big, really, really big. But I think Carl Sagan left us this lasting image when one of the Voyagers left the plane of our planets and just zipped out into that vastness. And Carl Sagan said, turn the camera around and take a picture of us, known
Right.
as the blue dot, just a pixel or two. And I think if we understand that in the vastness, we're so small here, it can't be that hard to be in fellowship with more people than we are right now. It can't be that hard to get along. We're just this tiny blue dot in this vastness. I don't think people understand. I believe we are in a different time, as you said, where I'm working on a sermon as a worship associate. My God can beat up your God. Which really has come down to how we are being perceived with one another, with a religious fervor that I have ultimate authority and my ultimate authority, my God, is going to vanquish you. And it is so hard to have that conversation about, well, what about the blue dot? Aren't we all just together?
Right.
We are in a different time, and the times develop different ways of seeing things, and we're in a very unusual upside down time, I would say.
And the question is how do we relate to just those differences in religious outlook? Which is why I said we're in challenging times, and I included religious challenging times. And I, we've all been in situations where we've been at a social event or around a dinner table, and there's somebody that makes a racial comment or something damaging, cruel, whatever. And it took me a while to learn, because I would try to engage them in rational argument, right? I would try to convince them that they just weren't seeing it right. And I failed every time. And so finally, one time I just said, well, John, we're all God's children. He had no comeback. What was he going to say? No, we're not. And and to this date, whenever I use that, it works every time. It works every time. They do not have a comeback. The argument stops, and they know that they have been stopped in whatever they've been saying.
Well, people I think now that I watch a lot of Fox News because I feel the need to understand what other people are doing. And I must say, for the past 2 months, the rhetoric, especially the lead up with these recent elections, has been so high. Even I couldn't do it for 5 minutes. It was so intense, which is why I crafted this notion of my God can beat up your God. And in part, what I'm trying to say is as you say, speaking rational. I like your line, how you handle it, but I'm basically saying you can't bring a hymnal to a gunfight. You really have to figure out some way to communicate in a way where some common ground can be found. And I think you've done a good job because many of the people who are professing my God can beat up your God are Christians.
Yeah. Well, there are times when I feel like Jesus has been hijacked.
Oh gosh, he has, yeah.
I mean, you know, I just I don't see it myself, but there part of what we didn't get to was the sense of power of the Spirit and the requirement of the Spirit to speak truth. You can't be deceptive or or knowingly tell lies and think that you're going to live a life of the Spirit. It just doesn't work that way. And so you're right. You know, being last in the line also means you're taking care of the people in front of the line and you're guarding and protecting them from the rear of the line. And so, yes, the sense of power is uh, has to be exercised in a way where the motive is not to beat the other person, but to show them the way towards truth. But sometimes that has to be firmly stated, I think. You know, did I mention Clara Barton at
No.
all in all of this? Well, you know, we're all aware of Clara Barton, right? If the Universalists had matron saints,
Hmm.
which we don't, I don't think, our matron saints would probably be Olympia Brown, the first woman minister ordained, and Clara Barton. But one of the things Clara Barton did was she went where no one else had been before, which was to take medical care into the battlefield, not remain on its outskirts. And I think one of the things that is appealing to the youth that I talk to is disregard that phone, um, is this idea that as universalists in our lives, we are responsible for going to places that other people um, are unwilling to go. And that is our challenge and our witness, I think. And that's why I think Clara Barton was a universalist. I have a letter in her hand in my office declaring herself a universalist.
Mhm. I know where the building is that she attended, the former Universalist Church building in Oxford, Massachusetts,
Wow.
that she and her family attended. It's now, unfortunately, an apartment building and a judo studio, but it still stands. It still stands, and nearby is her house is maintained by a Clara Barton Association that
Mhm.
uh, advocates for what children with diabetes. I think
Right.
they're a charity.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Richard. About 20 years ago, or more than that. There was a young man that was a member of my congregation, the UU Congregation of Atlanta, and his last name was Barton. And I asked him if he was any relation to Clara. He said, yes, as my grandmother. So I
Wow.
thought that was pretty interesting.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Oh, speaking of Olympia Brown, by the way, I served a church in Weymouth, Massachusetts, which was her first settlement. And so I'm her successor, which always pleased me.
Oh,
One time, a woman I'd never seen before introduced herself to me, and she said she was Olympia Brown's great granddaughter, and
wow.
she was just visiting, and I never saw her again. She was passing through. She lived in Florida or something like that, but she was Olympia Brown's great granddaughter. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, if there are no other questions, we could actually end on time this evening.
Yes.
And I'm going to do that unless, Dave, you have any closing words you'd like to share?
Well, only that thank you for indulging me. And I've enjoyed your comments, and don't lose faith and nurture your spirit.
Well, with that, I will extinguish our chalice for this evening. And we do have another December Vesper with Craig Morrow. He was here, but unfortunately had to leave. So you'll receive notices for that as well coming up. Again, the first Wednesday of each month using the same URL, but you'll receive a notice on that. So on behalf of the Universalist Convocation, I want to thank everyone for attending and especially to our speaker for presenting. And I think we do this in order to grow community and fellowship among ourselves. And I think that's vitally important, especially in these times, to know that there are other people who have concerns, fears, and hopes as we do as well. So thank you all for joining us this evening.